Good afternoon. I'm told I can't wander. I'm normally a wanderer. I try and hold on to this thing for dear life. Nice to be here. Right. Conington, A14. I was on the A14 for about 18 months and all. It was through possibly the worst winter I think I've ever worked through, and I've been working in the field since the mid-80s. Last winter was awful. So, folk did amazing work out there, and I hope and I think they've been thanked for it in many, many ways. I'll take you through this one site. I can't do the whole thing. The site is enormous, the A14 corridor, and there is a lot of archaeology on there, a lot of Saxon archaeology. I can't do justice to any of that. I've also left the employ of my company since finishing the site. I've not got access to all the data. Also, the project hasn't been done yet. We're still in that sort of just post-site, gathering things together, getting them sent off to specialists. So nothing's been looked at yet. So what you're about to see from me is my thoughts on, as you come off of the site, you should know what's going on. This is my theory. Now, it's only a theory. If, and I'm sure you do, you get people coming in here talking to you and saying, this is the truth, this is the fact, they'll be a charlatan. We don't know any real facts. We just have stories to tell. And I'm a firm believer in this, or my stories, I think, are better than other people's stories. But they're still stories. And if you dig on site for one more day or one more week, your story will change. And we know that from doing it on site for years. So to come off a site on day 428 and say, well, that's it, that's the truth, is nonsense. See ya. Well, one to one beeper. That's the beeper. Just briefly, on the A14, I worked for a company called Oxford Archaeology in the umbrella of a thing called COPA, which is Cotswolds Archaeology, Oxford Archaeology and PCA, for a group called Molar Headland Infrastructure, who are Molar and Headland. So 5 of the biggest companies in the country worked on the site, and there were about, I don't know, 280 people there, tops, at any one point. So, big thing. And, looking at just the Saxons, just to let you know, this little bit here, that's the new bit, and that's the old bit. This is A14. A14 has been there for several thousand years. I believe, personally, everybody's been there since the land bridge went down. So many, many thousands of years. That's a different talk though, not this one. The bypass bit around there, most of the Saxon sites are on that chunk of land between the Great Ouse and the Altenbury Brook, between the towns of Buckton and Conington, near to Huntingdon. There is one Saxon site, east of the Ouse, at a place called Conington. The reason there's lots over there and one over there is mainly because they're on the terrace gravels. Saxons like terrace gravels. Don't like wet things. You can't do like wet things. So, the one site sitting in there. Now, it sits just between Fenstanton, Fendrayton and Conington, where the new road pulls away from the old road and hacks across country. A fairly flat and dull piece of country, to be honest. Putting a road through hasn't done much damage to it, made it look pretty in some ways. But that's Cambridgeshire for you. Yeah, quite a big site, not too big. 1.4 kilometres west to east and about 25 hectares. So I think in the old days, when I first started doing this job in the 80s, a hectare was an enormous site, which would take me 6 months to dig. Now, at 25 hectares, it's about the normal kind of size we expect these days. We're greedy people now. You want big things, big landscapes. This is a big landscape. The archaeology on that site is pretty much everywhere. The black lines are just all the recorded features on this site. There are 2 little spots here and here where there's nothing. Little bits of muddy clay with nothing on them. The rest of it, wall-to-wall archaeology. Geology obviously is important everywhere. Geology is important, even more important, in a low-lying location. In large parts of Cambridgeshire, being 10 centimetres up or down, or being on this or that geology means you can and cannot live there at certain times in history. So, you're touching to the geology here. You've got a big flat plane of clayey gravel, low lying. A clay hill comes up, it's capped with gravel, and the clay goes down again the far side. And there are little streams that run through this, south to north, heading up towards the Great Ouse. That's it inside section view. Flat plane, clay rise, gravel cap, and down the far side. And that's it on the lower back, to show topography. You can see there's a tongue in here, this tongue of sort of 15 metres high, gravel cap on that clay, which has held that clay there in situ. We rise from 10 metres to 15 metres, over 1.4 kilometres, the maximum rise is 5 metres over the entire thing, which to us is quite big. That's a nice drone shot showing the site from the west, looking back towards Cambridge. Cambridge is this sort of smoky dark thing over here. And you can see on that, quite nicely, the different naturals. The nice pale, dry gravel cap, then that horrible dark clay slope, and the big flat clay hill at the far end of it. That makes some sense of it. Well, that's approaching the site on the A14 as it now stands, from the west, looking at the site which is here, and this over here is the hill that we're sitting on. Now, unfortunately, that lovely high green bit there isn't the hill, that is this quarry backfilled landfill, making it look even higher than it should be. So the actual rise is tiny, but it's perceptible and it matters. And the fact that it's high and it's gravel is important. Right, that's all archaeology. I'll take you through very briefly through the earlier periods that lead up to where we're heading for, which is the Saxons. Anglo-Saxon, whatever. All the archaeology on there in one lump, and the crop marks as well. I've put on there the relevant crop marks that come outside the site because they're all part of the whole picture, obviously. Middle Bronze Age. There is quite extensive Middle Bronze Age field system. Just remind again, it's big. So this is best part of a kilometre west to east that we can see, but it does go further east, it does go further west. It's covering a large area. Wide Middle Bronze Age system with not much, no people. A lot of these Middle Bronze Age field systems don't have people in them. They're just low and they're damp and they're wet and they're cattle. There are some little barrows, just 3 little barrows dotted across that landscape. Quite wee ones, but it's not a landscape of occupation. It's just cattle, cows. Middle Iron Age, a stream, a washing line of hanging enclosures. Big ditches, some 5-6 metres wide, 2.5 metres deep. Drainage on this middle flat bit, always a problem. And there are houses in there, but they need the big enclosures around them to drain away water. Romano British birds starts to get a bit more relevant and a bit more interesting. One minute. I do get very thirsty. The Romano British, 2 main elements within that, a settlement up here and field systems down here. Now this big swelling, we get this a lot in Cambridgeshire. It's a Cambridge thing. Around sort of the just post-concrete, maybe sort of 60, 70, 80, that kind of time, you get every half-decent farm, Iron Age Roman farm, or villa, or whatever. Anything that has its own little set of lazy bed systems that go out around it on the wet, unpleasant land that you can't use for anything else. And they grow something in it for maybe 50 years tops, then they stop and never try it again. I suspect they did it just for even 10 years, 20 years. They all did it for maybe 30 years tops, and they stopped doing it. We've never worked out what they were doing, despite the fact that there are thousands of these things now. There's one that did get some grape pollen in it up in Northamptonshire, but they can't all the grapes because they're on flat, wet, unpleasant clays, north-facing clays, you name it, horrible stuff. I suspect it's some kind of cash crop going on when the Romans first come over here and they've used this stuff, and for whatever reason, after 20, 30 years, the market disappears and they stop doing it. One day, someone will work out what they're for. Not me. Settlements. Yeah, settlements and field systems. Down there. Then we get to the early and middle Saxon. That's where we're headed now. They sit, obviously, on the high, dry, gravelly clay dump at one end. They do nothing anywhere else. They don't even look at it. They're their eyes from the mud and the slime. There probably are cattle down there or anything, but there's not a single pit, post hole, ditch, building, or pottery sherd so far in that entire stretch, apart from on that top level cap. Then there's post-medieval and medieval, which is mostly ridge and furrow, a few field ditches, and some quarries. But then nobody cares about that. So yeah, back to the Roman. What is the Roman thing? What the Roman thing is does matter for what the Saxon thing is that follows it. The Roman site is unusual for this part of the world. There is a road system. There's a road system that comes over. Look at the sort of top marks here on the features. There's a bunch of quarries in these which are there to make a causeway over that little river, which then goes by top marks west, dives down south, and it also bends up and around the top there, doing something roughly like that. There are little roads running all the way around this settlement, and they're coming off of the main A14, which you could call the Via Divana, and you might as well. A disputed name, a disputed road in many ways, but what the Via Divana, and that's the main road from Colchester to Cambridge to Godwin, Chester to Chester to Leicester, up that way. That's the main A14 road there, the Via Divana. Off that come these little shoots. Inside that is a Roman site. We've only done a bit of it. We've done the bottom half of this thing. The wet, muddy half at the bottom of that horrible clay slope. Most of the good stuff on top, on the gravels, is still there, or has been taken away by that big quarry bed. But what we do have in there, 4 hectares, well, at least 4 hectares. It may, of course, extend northwards, we don't know. There are clock marks up there, so that may well do. But we'll call it 4 hectares of Roman something. It's got on the south, this ditch here, this bit here, there's something big in there which has got a 4 metre by 2 metre ditch. And that's 4 by 2 metres at the strict level. Before that was stripped and ploughed trying to think, that would have been a 6 metre by nearly 3 metre ditch around this thing. It's a big old ditch on top of the gravel, not for drainage, but on the gravel here. So it's defensive or for show, whatever, one of the two, on that top there. Massive ditch. And things like column bases, or maybe the top of them, base top of them. We don't get these in South Cambridgeshire. We haven't got any stone. We're in the south. You've got to go up to Northamptonshire to get a stone. I've never seen a column base before anywhere in South Cambridgeshire. But column bases, we get nice bits of complex cut stone chucked in there of varying forms, and then facing plaster. A few bits, this beautiful sort of clean white, like a mullion or something, off a window. Curving at the top, 3 facets around it. Beautiful stuff. There's also a rather nice little bronze fasteness that I shan't read on too long. Good. There's something, I call it a Mansio. It's got stone buildings, it's got 1st to 4th century coinage, metalwork, various on there. We'll call it Mansio for that. It sits on a main road, on a hill. There's own little twist of roads around it. I can't think what else county it's going to be, really. It's not a normal farm. not what we call a villa. It might be a villa, you never know. We can get the rest of it either looked at by geophysics or by trenching maybe one day. But geophysics might do to extend that to find out what's needed. That would be useful. But for now, it's a Mansio with a question mark behind it. That's it there, just sitting in its little core of roads. Now, it obviously, on the high drive bit of Babel, becomes the focus for the 5th, 6th century Saxon settlement. Now, we do get into problems here because it isn't just in Cambridgeshire, in general, it is very hard to pinpoint definite continuation of settlement from the late 4th century to the early 6th century. Very hard indeed. Now, we probably aren't trying hard enough. I know certain sites that definitely haven't tried hard enough. Here, we did try very hard. We deliberately machined this thing, this whole site, a little bit higher than we should have done. Because obviously, if you're in the 5th century, it's going to be sitting in the tops of 4th century features. Just anything you can get in those tops, you can't afford to lose it. So we were always behind in the site trying to find that 5th century. I stood that on that hill and had an argument with a very world-renowned Cambridge archaeologist, in fact, shall we say. An argument about continuity from the 4th to the 6th century and how he or she was saying it doesn't exist, you will not find it, it doesn't happen. And me saying they didn't all die, you know, they were here in the 4th, they were here in the 6th, it didn't all go away. And if you're going to find it, you're going to find it on the high, dry, gravelly bits by main roads. That bit. So it is there somewhere. Hopefully, the project over the next few years will pull that out by carbon dating and by pottery. Pottery difficult, carbon dating probably also difficult, but we, they, have to do our best. So that is my diversion here. I went to the Regional Research Framework meeting, happens every, 5-6 years in East Anglia. All the great reviewers get together and try to work out what we need to look at in the next 5 or 6 years in all the periods we look at. And the Saxon one just kept coming back and back and back to, we've got to look at the 5th century. We understand the 4th, we still understand the 6th and the 7th and the 8th and the 9th. The 5th is a huge black hole of non-understanding. And it is there, we just must try hard to find it. Yes. In there somewhere is the 5th century, and that comes out into a recognisable late 5th, 6th century Saxon settlement on that beach. Just to put a contour plan showing the Saxon settlement is sticking to the highest bit it can find. This is because we know that in that region particularly, the water is coming up through the late 4th and 5th centuries, things getting wetter. You have to cling to what you can off the dry ground. And that's where they are. This, of course, you know, that site doesn't stop there at our original excavation. It goes north, it goes south. It probably goes a long way north and south. There are issues sometimes with people who produce publications or plans and sites and lead you to believe that the bit they've dug is everything. Because that's what they've done and know about it, but it's not. It's a tiny part of something that particularly matters in the 5th, 6th and the first half of the 7th century, when again we don't understand settlement patterns, but settlements are very, very dispersed. So a settlement which in the 8th century might be the size of a village, in the 6th century could be miles and miles of expanse before that contracts into the village sense. So yes, goes north, goes south, goes a long way. Don't know how far. I'd like to know how far. But if we can get someone like Steve, if Steve was here, I might suggest that we looked at geophysics south and north on these bits of land, just to add to this picture, it will be a huge help. I'll talk to you one day. Yeah, SFBs and post buildings. That's what you expect from a Saxon settlement. SFBs, post and pits. And if you're lucky, the odd bit of middenly thing here and there in a hollow, if it hasn't been ploughed away. But SFBs and post buildings are your main features. And obviously handmade Saxon pottery. Now, some of it is beautiful. That is beautiful. So no other reason other than it is a thing to look at and to love and to want to take home with you and to touch. Almost 2,000 sherds from that site. That's not many at all. For a site that size, not many at all. But we tried to get as much as we possibly could. Other stuff, again, the Saxon pottery, we have to look at this in a much more serious way. The problem with Saxon pottery is, everyone tells you it's either 5th to 8th century, or it's 9th to 12th century. That's not good enough. We have to try harder, and we can try harder, and we can work at this, and work out which of those potteries is most likely to be 5th, or 6th, or 7th, or whatever. Yeah. Try harder, much harder. I think on this kind of site we could do it. There's a little bit of, not huge amounts of stratigraphy, but there's some. And there is the opportunity to get a good number of carbon dates as well. So, worth looking at in a big way. There are 3 to 5 post buildings, I think, of this date. There could be more, but at the moment, of this date, 3 to 5. They are, well, one of them, standard kind of shape, about 9 metres by 4.5, a bog standard, domino shaped kind of Saxon post building. Then there are these two. These two are different. I never understood these two. They don't look Saxon, they don't smell Saxon, they don't sound Saxon when you hit them. The shape of them is, you make up your own way, really. That's an effort, but it's probably a bad effort. Quite what these are, they are too long and too narrow, and one of them is trapezoidal. If I hadn't had one of them dated, carbon 14 dated for a big chunk of charcoal in one of many post holes that had charcoal in them, and it hadn't come out in the 6th century, I would not believe it. But it did. So 6th century is the dates, and it's up to me now to work, or not, up to this site to work out what that means for these buildings, because they are not normal. They're not proper. There could be something, we're looking at something early, something half Roman, half Saxon, something 5th century, which has got some 6th century additions fixed up, burnt down, whatever. I don't know yet. But, why do I call it committing? Why do I look at these things? Try and get what they are. It just doesn't look right to me. Not me. And then there are the Victor's sunken featured buildings. Häuser or grub huts. Now I will use the term grub huts because I'm a digger. I didn't go to university, I never learned posh words, and grub huts is the English version of Häuser. Häuser itself gets confused with other things. I don't like SFBs, the name, because people take it to mean sunken floored building. And it's not a sunken. It's a sunken featured building, which is fine. But the floor was not sunken. The floor was raised. So, raised floor building are FB, raised floor building, I'll be happy with. But a sunken one doesn't work for me. So, grub hut is the term I use today. It works for most of us, in fact, who do holes. 24 grub huts. This is by way of so there are varying sizes. There's round ones, round deepish ones, round shallow ones, big, fat, juicy square ones, lovely ones, varying grub huts, 2 posters, 4 posters, 1 poster, no posters, square, so, all sorts on there. Not one type, there never is one type, they're always different, and that always interests me. I did do a site once, down in Suffolk, where I got to start working out family groups of grub huts. I thought I could tell which parents of the children which dug the next one. So this was done by our parents, so we don't get like this down here. And they're similar, but not the same. Over here, a different family building different shaped grub huts. Lovely stuff. So you can look at these things and think, who built this, why? Why the different shapes might not be anything to do with different uses, it might just be the way you've learned to do it from your parents and your grandparents. It's a nice thought. So yeah, grub huts themselves, the actual shape of them, number of post holes, varying things, is, yeah, it's, it's got its importance, but it's not that important. The important thing is, what were they used for? What did people do in them? Why and when? Now, to get that information, you won't get much probably from that. They'll say, it had a raised floor, which it did, and it had 2 posts in it. So 2 posts and a raised floor, and that's all you've got from that, really. I'll get no further. You can make all sorts of, West Stone style creations, but they're all nonsense. No one knows. So, looking at the fields, this body is definitely a bit of a diversion. We haven't got to the Middle-Saxon yet, I do apologise. We'll get there in the end, but I want to divert down the alleyway of grub huts first. I like grub huts, and I've got some here, so I'm going to talk about them. They are a fascinating and beautiful piece of old architecture. The fields of grub huts. Any decent grub worth of salt will have 3. It's deep enough. Primary, secondary and tertiary fields. There's an example. 3 kinds of fields down there. Now, obviously some, the shallow ones don't. They either just have primary or, if you're unlucky, tertiary. And that's it. How these fields get here is fascinating. How does dirt get into a hole? Now, looking at those 3 levels of field, the tertiary fill, the top black, often black and sticky and relatively fines rich, but not very fines rich, bits of pot and bone and filth in there. That just seems to be general kind of detritus sitting in hollows around this site. Happy with that, that's fine. So the location of any fines within that tertiary fill in the grub just doesn't matter. You can take one big lump, if you like, and say like 4 tertiary fills. We don't, we do it in quarters still, and we go north, east, northwest, just for keeping things in a pattern. But those fines are going to be important looking at the whole site in general for distributions. Secondary fill is much more interesting, because how does that get there? There's loads of it. I've never known how it gets there. I've done hundreds of these damn things, and I couldn't put my hand on my heart and tell you how that stuff gets there. It's often far less fines rich. It's often paler. It's not mixed detritus. It's a soil that's been put back in there by people. It's not got it back in. It hasn't sort of just flown in. It's been put in there. Where's it come from? I don't know. It might come from around the outside of the grub, but it may want they've taken out and put to one side for 10, 20 years, built on or whatever. And I don't know. It could be turfs. I don't know. But it's interesting. But also we do know that the fines within it doesn't matter where they come from. A friend of mine, Jess Tipper, did the grub hut PhD years ago. And he spent a long time 3Ding every single fine in grub huts, just to prove that it doesn't mean anything. And we need to do it again, which is great. So secondary fields, doesn't matter where they come from again, worrying about what that stuff is and where it comes from is important. Then the primary fill. The primary fill is obviously the most important. That's the one that will tell you what was happening in that feature when it was in use. And that's what we really cared about. We cared about what the people at the time were doing in and with that building. So that stuff, primary, that's vital. That's no good doing that in quarters. We use it in quarters, but also everything in there, and there's varying. The normal kind of stuff. Pin beaters and pins and spindle whorls and lovely combs that are not 9th century in there as well. Gorgeous things, but it's not so much what they are, it's where they come from. There are also, in those block parts, blobs of unfired blue-green clay. Now that is important. The spindle whorls, yeah, they matter. The pins matter, but that really matters. Blobs of unfired blue-grey clay. Now, they've been ignored by most people forever. I know this because I've done 2 sites with lots of block parts on them. One in Suffolk, one in Cambridgeshire. I've done others as well elsewhere, 2 big ones. And in both of those, I've got blobs of unfired blue-grey clay on all my block part floors. Floors, mate, not floor, bases. You try and find those in other people's descriptions, you can't find it. They haven't recorded it, they haven't picked it up. It's just dirt to them and shove it out of the way, looking for the treasure. The problem with this stuff, what's it got again? This stuff, and that stuff. Treasure blinds you to truth. Never look at treasure. Treasure will dazzle you, and the truth will run past and hide in the corner. So, forget treasure, think about daubs of unfired blue-grey clay. That's the important thing. So, there's some more. Look, we can do it for hours of this. So that's what we're going. Some of them look like things, obviously, like loom weights. Some of them don't. So, we plotted, or my people plotted, every find on the bottom of these block parts, including the clay under my strict orders. They didn't want to do it, I told them. And I've drawn all those block parts and recorded it all on plans. This is an example. SFB number 5. These are the primary fill finds. So you've got in there, you've got the unfired clay. The dark green is areas of sort of, you can't really make out any real lumps, but it is clay somewhere. And the pale green is lumps of clay. So that's where they sit, all those clay lumps in that block. Then you've got your pottery. So all bits of pot have been potted as well on the base of the pit. Not many there, also I won't give you a few, less than 10. But all plotted individually so you can try refits across the feature. Quite important to know. And also important to know where they are, because they're getting in there through that floor somehow. As is the bone, the animal bone, if there is any, as are the spindle whorls and the pin beaters. So yeah, there's the treasure, pin beaters, spindle whorls. They get landed as well, obviously. So you know where they've fallen. And then, so all 24, there's the first 12, number 12, and there's there. Coagulate? No, amalgamate those into the dozen with the most blue-grey clay in them, and that's them, 12 are the big ones. There's a range of 33 kilograms to 2 kilograms. There's about 4 which have a lot in. There's about another 4 that have a good amount in. There's 4 that have a little bit in, and the other 12 have got either nothing or little bits here and there, which are potentially just bits of blue-grey clay that don't mean anything, which is possible to have. So yeah, then you look at where they are all sitting. They're mostly in the northeast quadrant. Some's in the northwest, some's in the north. But they're mostly in the northeast or the north of these things. Now, that's important. These things mean something. And they're telling us about the structure and the construction and use of those block parts. As a amalgamation again, all those block parts, by quarter, that's where the blue-grey clay comes from. 36 kilograms in the northeast quarter, and opposite it, only 8 kilograms in the south. The southwest, almost no clay. Northeast, lots of clay. Other ones, a fair bucket of clay. That's the pattern in this site's pattern. I did that 20 years ago in Lowestoft, on the other big block part site I had done. In fact, 2 years ago I left that job just after I finished doing it as well, so didn't get to work it up unfortunately. And the same thing now, 10 years later. I'm cursed by block parts, big part. They didn't come along when I had to do the job. That one has again northeast and northwest, but the southwest again is the blank one. The two patterns are similar, if not identical. but very similar. The percentages are there, there's, just showing you how much is in the north, how much is in the east, the southwest. Now, this is all leading nowhere because I haven't got time to explain what this means today. It's a taster. A taster. So yeah, plot those onto the big picture. Look at where they come from. The red ones are where there's lots of clay, pink ones a fair bit of clay, green ones no clay. Doesn't know where they are. They're random to an extent. Or are they? If they're all together in one group, that might be random. Because they're not in one group, they are spread out. Does that mean they're not random? Are they spread out on purpose? I don't know. One day I'll tell you. So yeah, brief look at that. Clay by kilo per quadrant, just showing you on a easy to see scale. Northeast quadrant, that's where it all sits. Pottery, on the other hand, pottery is much more random. It's up and down, it's in all the quarters, it doesn't tally with the blue-grey clay. So the blue-grey clay isn't getting there in the same way as the pottery is. That's important too. And so, that was a little aside, by the way. An alleyway. Don't take alleyways in archaeology, you've got to miss an awful lot. Following the one true straight path is madness. There are thousands of side doors. Take them, see where they go. Most lead you nowhere, but some treasure in there. And I've stood down the alleyway there in the glove hut world before I like that movement. Before we get back into the Middle Saxon, which is going to be for half an hour fine. Middle Saxons. From the early Saxon, we move on. Is that right? Half an hour? Is that right? 20 minutes. 20. Ah, fine. I'll talk faster then. The Middle Saxon of this site, broadly 650 to 750. You can discuss with a room full of Middle Saxonists when the Middle Saxon period starts, and it'll be a punch jump right in here. No one's really that clear. It doesn't really matter. It's a movable feast. Depending on where you are and what you call Middle Saxon, it doesn't really matter. So yeah, we're going to say that's the rough span of the settlement on this site. That's what Middle Saxon looks like. It turns from that to that. Not quite overnight, but probably not far off. There are in there, without doing any post-excavation work so far at all, coming off site with a stratified plan on site and some finds, thinking this is how it's working so far. So, without post-ex, there are 3 phases of ditching going on. For me, ditching and enclosure, and what that means for the coming in of the people from the wide dispersed settlement pattern into a location, that makes your Middle Saxon for me. That's the crunch. It's that calculation, that shrinking into a core settlement. So, ditches are important. When these come in, one really important. I'm going to say 650 to 700, that kind of time, for phase 1. Phase 1 stuff is quite thin, it's quite feeble. There is suggesting the trackway here, and a whole bunch of buildings up here, which go in there at some point. You can't date buildings, there's no finds in them. It's almost, that big one down there, we're lucky with. This lot, there's about 5 up there, thousands of post holes, nothing in them, nothing to carbon date, it's just post holes. I think they're Middle Saxon. They're sitting in an area that had been, just go back a bit, had been blank. Right, no blood pass, no building, big blank bit in there. Now, that then gets filled with buildings, and this possible trackway down here. So, is that a throughway, a trackway on that Roman, ex-Roman system, which is then being filled in, not into a little bit, possibly. Phase 1, thin stuff. Phase 2, big stuff. Big, round, squarely round enclosures. Massive things. Third phase, more of the same. So that again, up to 700, 750. It's approximately 100 years worth of stuff going on. I think, without many carbon dates, I can't be sure. But the pottery is telling at the moment, we've gone by 750 in this place. So it's a very short-lived thing. Major, but short-lived. So yes, just showing again there, that's the contour, and that's it, hugging that contour, that right high road. Ditches, I like ditches, mostly because of what they mean in the Middle Saxon period. That's just a ditch, like I showed here. And so is that. And so is that. And that's a bigger ditch. This is a bigger, deeper, more defensive ditch. This one, we'll see again in a moment, it's about 2.5 metres deep, V-shaped, defensive, around the gateway. These people are getting serious in that second phase of occupation. The handmade pottery. Handmade pottery, as I said before, is an issue. Because it goes from the 5th to the 8th century at the moment, and most Saxon pot specialists will just tell you, yep, 5th to 8th. I think that's cop out. They've got to try much, much harder. If we're there in the Middle Saxon period, all that stuff is happening, all that stuff is happening in that period. Where's the pottery? Some of it, that's the handmade pottery back in these features. Not much of it. Compare that to how much was in the early Saxon features, tons in the early Saxon features, and that's all early Saxon pottery in those features. You'd think, looking at that these denser areas of handmade pottery in Middle Saxon features should be maybe just residual stuff coming out of the earlier features, but they're not. There are gaps in here. So I think what's happening is there are some of that pottery is definitely going to be Middle Saxon handmade pottery in use at the same time as the two rather lovely local Middle Saxon handmade pottery types. And this is them. Ipswich ware, which comes in our area probably about 720, 725. Don't think much earlier. 43 sherds on there, on a fast site, in the tops of ditches, in the tops of well huts, not in these features. So by 725, 730, and it's coming in, these are all full. And that stuff sits on top, floats around. These are again gratuitous Ipswich ware pin-ups that I could live with this stuff. I can make my house and stuff. My bed. That one's about swashed frog or something. The spout. I've seen one Ipswich ware spout in my 20-odd years working in this area. That's it. Gorgeous. Yeah. 43 sherds in there. Now, they're coming in single fines. In the tops of features, a couple of double fines and one larger group in top of the upper. But they're single fines scattered around. Just by comparison, I've got a site over the road, the far side of the A14, called Conington. Now, this site, 163 bits of Ipswich ware. Compare that in size to our site, that's down there, that's 100, that's got 43, it's what is it, I don't know, it's 30 times the size, and it has 1/5 the amount of pottery. That's just telling us, I think, that that big site does not last. The little one goes through from when this brick comes in 725, it's still there when it goes out in 850. Our one's not. It's just, you get a bit of this which is coming in and we stop. That or there's no one living there. Now, take a pick. So yes, the second pottery type at this period, maxi ware. A thing of intense beauty and great rarity in this part of the world. I found on this site more maxi ware at one site here than I found in the rest of my life put together. I've done more Middle Saxon sites than anybody else in this area. So you know, great stuff. That's it. It comes in big cooking pots with hangers on it. It's a thing of huge, and there's also the big, fresh, chunky pieces, and they're coming in phase 2 ditches in one location. There are a few scattered around here, but what's in there? What's happened there is there's been a midden heap which someone's chucked all this stuff in very, very quickly. That's then gone back in the ditches, and we've got that stuff there. So What that is a visit. It's somebody who comes from somewhere in the northwest, not the northwest, our northwest, obviously, Peterborough, west of Peterborough, the real northwest, and they've come down from there with their stuff. They've stayed a day, a week, a month. They've cooked, they've ate, they've done what they do, and they've gone away again. And they've left that stuff broken and burnt and put it to heat. That's one visit, and there's 109 sherds in that site. For 30 context, while some of it does come as single finds, most of it comes as bigger dumps in those ditches. So that's a different deposition thing. The Ipswich ware just scatters over for a few years. That comes in one lump. Now that's important again. So, just going back, look at, if that was our Mansio surrounded by roads, then this is our Middle-Saxon kind of site. There are cotton marks down here, take it further on. These ones could be part of it as well. It's quite a big, expansive Middle-Saxon ditched, enclosed something. And that's probably a road through there as well. And that's it on a good plan. And that's it again. Do the same thing. So yes, okay. A couple of things to look at. 2 post holes. Now post holes on the whole, not very interesting, but down here, a couple of rather sweet ones. There's a gateway down here, this thing here. There's 5 phases. Take the rubbish ones off. There are 3 main phases down here, and that gateway is important. 2 post holes, that one first, in this enclosure. So deep and so narrow, it's about this deep, that to machine it down twice just to get to the bottom in there. So that deep, that wide. If you fit me in it comfortably, even though I'm a fat man, it'll be up here somewhere. The fill of it is basically it's all burnt. Burnt straw, burnt pig manure, burnt cereals, burnt stuff. Burnt stuff in there. Nothing else, no post pipe, just burnt stuff. Not burnt on the top, not burnt on the sides, no burning, but just ash, frankly. So yeah, 2 metres at the ground level would have been higher originally, 2 metres ground level. And that shape, how do you work that shape? How does that work for anything? I think it's a post in there, a big post, and there's no packing, there's no stones or gravel packing, but I think to hold a big post up, best way to do it, dig a hole, put your post in and put a wedge in, a big fat wedge. That means you get no post packing because your wedge is taken out, the wedge just goes. So that's what that's doing, I think. And what is a gigantic 6 metre tall post doing in that site? If it was priest, you'd say totem pole, you know, whatever. It could be a gallows, it could be a totem pole, it could be a whatever you think. I think beacon up there, on top of the hill, by a road, in an enclosure, which is obviously something important, gated enclosure. I'm thinking big, I'm thinking communication for these things. And there were 3 of them, not just one, there were 3 there, in a line. On top of that hill, you can see both ways for miles. So my best guess is beacon. And maybe all that ash just comes from burning all that pig shitty straw up there in the flame. I don't know. There are other stories are available. But that's mine. Yeah, 3 and 1 here. Second post hole, down here, in the gateway post hole. A thing of intense beauty. You can see there are 4 ditches coming to an end, different phases, and the second phase, this one here, you put a section across that post hole, looks like that. It's at least 2.3, 2.5 metres deep, 80 metres wide at the back. That's a tree in there. As a gate post to hold up some structure over that gate post. A thing of beauty, but also an interesting thing. It had halfway up, a body. Now, you didn't expect to get a body in the ditch at this date. This one, it's a young lady, late teen maybe, face down, on top of that backfill post, there's a post over there, her head's on the backfill. So they take the post out, filled it in, put her in, covered her up in there. Dating her looks like, best guess on the carbon 14 day, about 697, 80. So somewhere in there, that's when the gate comes out, the gate comes down, they put a body in there, and that seems to signal the end of that settlement, that site, at about that time. Somewhere, I'm going to go for 750 as my end date still. 100 years start to finish. There are other bodies, only a few, and they're very, very truncated. On the eastern side here, on that ridge, there's about 5 bodies with no finds. They could be any of these things, late Roman, sub-Roman, conversion period. They're not early Saxon, but there's no finds. There's one bit of Millefiori glass, which has been shaped into a brooch, next to one of them, good enough for me. So I'm going to the 5th century, kind of, possibly pre the grave goods Saxons, maybe, or if you, I don't know. Carbon dating will tell. One more feature worth mentioning, wattle-lined pond. Gorgeous thing, good wattling, big pond, down there on the west side of the site, bottom of the clay slope, which is the pool, the pond, the source of a thing called the Moor Brook, which heads north up towards the Uist. And it marks, at this point, the parish boundary between Conington and Fenstanton. And it also marks the boundary between Fendrayton and Fenstanton, and it goes in marking boundaries all the way down, marking boundaries all the way to the Uist, basically, in that way. Now, the Conington parish boundary is also the Huntingdonshire and Cambridgeshire parish boundary. Boundaries don't get made. Boundaries evolve, boundaries get reused. This boundary is an old one. The Cams Hunt boundary was put in, maybe in the 10th century if we're lucky. But it's put in on the site of an old boundary. If you put that on the best guess, the very best guess of where the tribal hidage kingdoms of in the groups, kingdoms and whatever, tribal, in the 7th century might have been, that's where we are, and that puts that boundary on one of the, maybe the Herstingers, maybe one of the 2 of the small Middle Anglian kingdoms, and that's where our site sits, on that boundary of an old 6th, 7th century kingdom. There we are. And also, I like the fact that in Cambridgeshire, every single parish lines up on the A14, the Via di Line. You jump into Huntingdonshire, and they go straight across it. Now, I like that. Is that people doing things differently on 2 sides of the boundary when they're making parishes? I think it might be. And that helps us with when parishes get made. Fascinating stuff. So, Kingstons. Conington is a King's Enclosure, Scandinavianised version of Kingston. Kingstons are important things. There are 64 Kington and Kingston-derived place names in England. 32 of those demonstrably there, acting as a meaning King's Tongue, or Tun, if you wish. I can't do the accent. There are none called Kingham or Kingsham. That's important. That's a different story, a different talk as well. Not this one, but it's important. The whole ham-tom thing is brilliant. I love it. If you put those pre-Doomsday Kingstons onto our map of boundaries, you will see almost all of them sit on a boundary. If the boundaries are where we think they might be. The rest sit on a road. One of the ancient, or the Roman roads that are still going in the Saxon period, the big major roads. On the road, on the boundaries are Kingstons. Kingstons, look at Mercia. Take Mercia in the 6th century, the estimated area of Mercia. 3 of these Kingstons on the western border, western boundary of Mercia. By the 7th century, it's expanding, that we know, and look where the Kingstons go on the borders of that as it expands. By the 8th century, it's expanded even more, and the Kingstons go with it, down to the sea, out to Wales, whatever. They're marking boundaries, marking location, marking roads and boundaries where people are going to cross, control points is what they are. Look at the three Kingstons in our little area, Huntington, Cambridge, just around A14. There's our one, which sits here on the A42, the divider. There's one at Conington just north of us, sits just off Ermine Street, up there. And there's Kingston, which has got two. It's got Kingston Village, sits on a road that comes in from the A14, the divider, Cambridge, from Cambridgeshire westwards, and Ermine Street there again. It's got the Kingston Manor, which shows Pico later on. So, choice of two there for that one. So Kingston's are 7th and 8th century police stations, customs posts, border guards, jails, pounds, whatever. They're deliberate foundations to facilitate royal power in the newly annexed and controlled lands. Who's doing this? Mercia's doing this, not Wessex. Specifically, the sons of Penda are doing this. Now, you can take those three. I'm going, Peter's too early. Wolfhere. He's the man that built, he's the man that had Conington constructed, had it located. The first Christian king of Mercia, and the chap who restored Mercian dominance in England at that time. Now, him and his brothers, Ethelred, and then there's a couple of C's in there, which we ignore, and Ethelbald comes in. Those three kings are the span of our site at Conington. Wolfhere builds it, it goes out when Ethelbald is there, and it might be Ethelred that turns up with the big pots on the way to East Anglia and dumps over. One of those kings, they'll probably turn up there on the way through, heading east, heading to Kent, fighting Kent, heading to East Anglia, or whatever. They're the three kings, putting names back in the history. And that's it, there's a picture showing the site again from the west to the east. I sped up at the end there, but we've got finishing time. That's it.